Welcome to the Exam Room Live, brought to you by the Physicians Committee. Hi, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll, and this is the healthiest half hour anywhere online today. Appreciate you joining us right here on Facebook and on YouTube. So let's set the table as we get ready to set the record straight on a number of vegan-related myths. We have two of the leading voices in nutrition here today to answer your questions as we wrap up the week with a big old health Q&A. Dialing up the answers for us today from the doctor's mailbag are Dr. Neal Barnard. Sir, appreciate you being here.
Great to be here, Chuck.
And tag teaming this one is Dr. Jim Loomis from the Barnard Medical Center. You also know him from the Game Changers documentary. Dr. Loomis, appreciate you being here, my friend.
Always a pleasure, Chuck.
All right, and your mission watching this right now is to fill up that doctor's mailbag. Go ahead, post your questions in the comments section now, or you can send them to us on Twitter using the hashtag ExamRoomLive. And Dr. Loomis and I were also going to be talking about New England Patriots quarterback Cam Newton, whose vegan diet is again being questioned. Is it negatively impacting his performance on the field? Well, we're going to be taking a look at that controversy, and we're going to be diving into the science. So stick around for that. But first, before we go any further, let's get a check on what is happening in the world. Here are your health headlines for Friday, September 25th, 2020. The U.S. now on track to record its 7 millionth case of coronavirus today. That is 246 days after the first infection was reported. Meanwhile, health officials also keeping a close eye on the rate of new infections, as that is once again on the rise following steady declines throughout the month of August. The current average is about 6,000 cases a day more than what it was just 2 weeks ago. In other news, how about some berry good news? Blueberries, they've been around for generations, but now researchers in Japan say they have identified a new compound in the little blue fruit that can be used to treat inflammatory disorders. Now, this compound is known as PSB, and it has strong immunosuppressive properties that can be harnessed to combat conditions such as inflammatory bowel disease. The study's authors say PSB is similar to resveratrol, a more well-known compound already touted for its medicinal effects. And finally, earlier this week, we told you about the skyrocketing sales of tofu. But now it appears that vegan cheese is also all the rage. The leading cheese company in the UK now says 20% of its sales comes from its non-dairy line. Perhaps even more impressive, the cheese branded under the Applewood line has only been available for about a year. The company also says that sales have increased 16% a month every month dating back to July and show no signs of slowing down. And looking to keep up with consumer demand, Applewood plans on releasing new varieties of its dairy-free line just in time for the holidays. All right, now we will be opening up that doctor's mailbag in just a minute, so keep your questions coming in. But I want to talk about a recent article that was published in the Boston Globe about Patriots quarterback Cam Newton. The former All-Pro is arguably the biggest name right now in the NFL who is 100% vegan. And there are critics, though, who say that his diet is derailing his career. So to discuss this, I wanted to bring Dr. Loomis into the equation, not only featured in the movie The Game Changers, but also a former team physician for an NFL franchise, the Rams. Dr. Loomis, appreciate you being here, my friend.
It's great to be here, Chuck.
All right. Now, the crux of this argument, let's just dive right in. The crux of this argument stems from a sports dietitian who is quoted in this particular article as saying, "I have never once recommended an athlete of mine change over to a vegan diet. When we're looking at the gold standard for recovery, we're always coming back to those essential amino acids. We're getting all 9 of those in animal-based foods, but for an athlete like Cam to keep up with his needs, I would think that is hard to do on a vegan diet." So my question, Dr. Loomis, first of all, is can a plant-based diet provide you with all 9 essential amino acids?
Of course it can, Chuck. And I think, this really is gets to one of the prevailing myths in the sports performance world that, you got to get your protein. And the only place you can get protein is from animals. And it's just simply not true. Studies have shown that athletes on a plant-based diet, if you're an endurance athlete, it may actually enhance performance. There's never been, and if you're a strength athlete, there's no it's not detrimental to your performance. You can perform just as well on a plant-based diet as a omnivorous or that includes animal-based foods. The other, it's also been shown that people who eat plants primarily get more than enough protein, probably more than they actually need, as long as they're getting enough calories. And one of the other prevailing myths is that plant-based proteins aren't complete. So there are 9 essential amino acids, which is what the dietitian was referring to, that our bodies can't make, and we have to consume those. And what amino acids are, just to be clear, so proteins are strings of amino acids, and when we consume protein, those amino acids are actually broken down in our gut and absorbed as the individual amino acids. So they're kind of reassembled in our liver to make whatever protein we need. There are plant-based proteins contain all of the essential amino acids, and it is impossible to become deficient in either protein or an individual amino acid if you're eating a well-balanced whole food plant-based diet. Now, certainly if you survive on potato chips and Oreos, that might be an issue. But I suspect that Cam Newton is not a junk food vegan. And I mean, there's a whole list of very prominent athletes who excel in their sports who are plant-based. Chris Paul, perennial NBA All-Star, Novak Djokovic, the tennis player, the Williams sisters have been plant-based. Alex Morgan, who's a world-class soccer player. Kendrick Ferris, an Olympic weightlifter. Dotsie Bausch, who won a silver medal in the 2012 London Olympics. So on and on and on, right? So again, it just really gets to it's really old school thinking. I think it's, the dietitian needs to be re-educated about what a healthy diet really is and the benefits that a whole food plant-based diet provide. And it really has to do with recovery and the anti-inflammatory nature of the diet itself.
And another point that was raised in this article was, we just talked about the amino acids, but now let's talk about other nutrients, because another point that was raised was that, well, a vegan diet will also lack other nutrients, and that in turn may negatively impact a football player's performance on the field. From everything that we've been discussing here on this show and then the podcast, which has been around for 3 years, this is one of the more nutrient diets that I know of on the face of the earth. So is there any truth to this notion that there's just not enough nutrients there?
Well, I mean, that's clearly not true as well. Again, a whole food plant-based diet gives you more than enough nutrients. Now, what she may be referring to is B12. B12, we need B12 for healthy nerve function and brain function, and actually helps us make our red blood cells. And one of the fallacies around that is if you're not eating meat, you can't get B12. Well, actually, the B12 that comes from meat in the modern world, so B12 comes from actually the dirt that is kind of in and on the animals, and because we raise animals in such horrific, unhealthy conditions in CAFOs and these huge chicken houses and things like that. The animals aren't getting enough B12 because they're not exposed to the healthy bacteria in the dirt. So almost all of commercially raised animals are actually supplemented with B12, which is exactly what, if you're on a plant-based diet, you need to do. And in fact, some people recommend that anyone over the age of 65 should supplement with B12 as well. So that's really the main one she might be referring to. But other than that, I mean, again, as you said, Chuck, plant-based diet is incredibly nutrient rich, because if you think about it, a cow or a pig or a chicken has eaten primarily plants. They've used all the good stuff, the fiber and the anti-inflammatories and phytonutrients, to run their own machinery, and they've just concentrated fat and protein, into their muscle, into their meat, which we consume. So, why don't we skip the middleman and reap all of the benefits, of the food that we eat, including the protein, which we need, but also all of the anti-inflammatories, the fiber, on and on. So, again, I think the article is misguided.
And real quickly, specific to performance as well, let me just give you some statistics through 2 games of the season. I went and I pulled this morning. He leads the league in rushing attempts for quarterbacks, has 122 yards on the ground, second among quarterbacks, 4 rushing touchdowns. That too is first among quarterbacks. And he's on pace to have the highest passing completion percentage of his entire career. And for you fantasy football players out there, he's also the third highest scoring quarterback in the league. So when it comes to performance, so far so good for Cam in a Patriots jersey. But finally, the last thing that was raised in this article that I really wanted to touch on with you is whether or not a vegan diet can make an athlete more injury prone. We've seen Cam go down to injuries the past 2 seasons, but does that have anything to do with what it is that he is eating? Is there a connection between being injury prone and what it is that you're fueling your body with?
I know of no scientific evidence that suggests that somehow what you eat makes you more injury prone. And in fact, I would argue, I mean, the injury rate in the NFL is 100%. I don't care what anybody says. It is such a violent sport down on the field, and everybody gets hurt every single game. It doesn't always require specific, medical treatment, but the bumps and bruises and the strained ligaments, I mean, that's just part of the game. And I would, in fact, argue the opposite, that a whole food plant-based diet, because it is so highly anti-inflammatory, in fact, it speeds up recovery. You talked to Derek Morgan, who was in the movie The Game Changers, and he talks about this specifically, that when he went plant-based, the markers for inflammation in his body actually normalized, despite being in this incredibly violent, on the field in this violent confrontation every game. So I would, in fact, argue that a whole food plant-based diet has a beneficial effect in helping football players in particular recover from their extremely hard workouts, and especially the contact injuries they sustain in the game.
All right. We will leave it at that. Certainly, there is definitely more to discuss here, but I mean, it's fascinating, this debate, the nutritional science for athletes. It never ceases to amaze me. Stick around, because it is time now, Dr. Loomis, to open up the doctor's mailbag. And for that, we're also going to welcome Dr. Neal Barnard to the show. So if you have a question, oh, look at that new fancy graphic. Thank you, guys. That's why I say that the exam room crew is the best in the business. But if you have a question that you would like to go ahead and ask Dr. Loomis or Dr. Barnard, go ahead, post that in the comment section now. With the time remaining, we will be getting to as many of them as we possibly can. Dr. Barnard, I want to bring you in first. Something that is completely different from what Dr. Loomis and I were just discussing. This is a question that comes to us from Sandra. She's wondering about fatty liver disease. She wants to know what types of foods can cause it, and can a plant-based diet help to reverse it?
Okay, let me give a comment, but I would also invite Dr. Loomis to come in, because at the Barnard Medical Center, that's one of the conditions that you expect to see fairly routinely in people who come in who have been on a standard American diet. Fatty liver disease means just what it sounds like, is that fat is accumulating in the liver tissue. It's extremely common in the United States. And unfortunately, we see in patients with diabetes, when we send them up for magnetic resonance spectroscopy studies, you see fat inside the liver cells that cause insulin resistance, and fatty liver causes all kinds of other problems. So the question is, what kind of diet do I need? And the good news is, you don't need one diet to lose weight, another diet to lower your cholesterol, another diet to improve your fatty liver. A low-fat, healthy, plant-based diet does all of those things. And as the weight starts coming down, the fatty liver starts to resolve. So it all works together.
Dr. Loomis, your thoughts on this? Some of the things that you've noticed working with patients over at the Barnard Medical Center?
Sure. So fatty liver is very common. In fact, it's increasingly common. And unfortunately, untreated fatty liver can go on to actually cause cirrhosis. And I've actually had a few patients over the past 10 years who have gone on to develop liver cancer because of the cirrhosis. As Dr. Barnard said, fatty liver is associated with insulin resistance. So just like we get fat deposited in our muscle cells, which creates insulin resistance, we can also get fat deposited in our liver cells, which also can contribute to insulin resistance. So we oftentimes see it in the setting of metabolic syndrome or prediabetes. But again, the additional kind of risk associated with fatty liver is, in addition to the insulin resistance that's associated with it, it can cause chronic inflammation of the liver. So there are a few it's a small percentage of patients, but the problem is you can't tell the difference about who has just steatosis, which is just fat deposit in the liver, versus steatohepatitis, which means fat deposit in the liver associated with inflammation. And just like with insulin resistance, a whole food, plant-based diet, very high fiber, very low fat is again, as Dr. Barnard said, there's no one diet to lower your cholesterol, and another diet to lose weight, and another diet to perform athletically, and another diet to get rid of your fatty liver or reverse your insulin resistance. It's really all the same thing, which is beautiful, really.
Dr. Barnard, coming back to you here for this question. Bone fractures, very common among football players, but you know who doesn't play football professionally? That would be older women. And so Sherry writes at 1216, she wants to know, what are the best practices for excellent bone health in older women? I keep getting these online ads for supplements.
I feel your pain. It's true that commercial pressures have really distorted the world of osteoporosis prevention. It started really with the dairy industry, with the whole idea that was promoted back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, that you need to drink milk as a child to build strong bones when you're young, so that you'll have them sort of like a bank account to draw on later in life. I have to say, it has not worked out at all. If you look at the research on dairy consumption and bone integrity or fracture risk, dairy products have virtually no effect at all on either one of them. And then you have the other commercial pressures, which is pharmaceuticals. And there are pharmaceuticals that are often used, particularly in women who have got osteoporosis and maybe had a fracture. They have substantial risks. So you'll want to talk with your doctor about whether or not they are right for you. But the lifestyle steps are ones that you're aware of. You do need calcium. You don't need dairy. Cows don't make calcium. The calcium that they have in milk all came from the grass they're eating. And that's because calcium is an element in the earth, and it passes through the roots of the grass into the blades of grass, and so the cows get it. And hopefully you're not eating grass, but you might be eating kale and collards and broccoli and Brussels sprouts and other green leafy vegetables, most of which have highly absorbable calcium. So step 2 is you need to absorb that calcium, and that's the role of vitamin D. Vitamin D comes from the sun. It reaches your skin, and then the vitamin D is made in your skin, and that helps you absorb the vitamin D from the Brussels sprouts you just ate. If you live in North Dakota, where I grew up, and there's not a lot of sun in November and December and January and February and March and April, you might want to supplement. It's a good idea. Most doctors would say probably 2,000 IUs, international units, per day. Then beyond that, give your bones a reason to live. No, you're not a football player, but you do want to have exercise. Even brisk walking, because of the up and down movement, will stress your hips and your thighs and so forth in a helpful way. That's good. Do some push-ups and other exercise that can help you. This is a good time to be a non-smoker, to not overdo it with alcohol, and to not overdo it with salt. So those are a few basics for healthy bones.
Sticking with you here, Dr. Barnard, this is a good question from Catherine. She's been watching us throughout the week talking about COVID. She says, when you talk about weight concerns and COVID, does this include people needing to lose just 10 or 15 pounds?
Yes, it does. When the virus emerged in China at the beginning of this calendar year, the people who were very overweight, way into the obese category, had the highest risk of very severe cases. However, when you look at the people who had moderate overweight, mild overweight, it just stepped right down. The closer you got to a really healthy weight, the better off you were. So let's say you want to lose 10 or 15 pounds. If you do lose those 10 or 15 pounds, when COVID arrives, if it does, you're going to be likely better off. Why? Because fat cells in your body express on the surface of the cell, they express this thing called the ACE2 enzyme. That's the welcome mat that says to the virus, come on in. So the smaller your fat stores, the better. And what's the number? Go online. You can go to our website, pcrm.org, or go anywhere online to look for a BMI calculator, body mass index calculator. Put in your height, put in your weight. A number will come out, and it should be between 18.5 and 25 for That's a healthy weight range. There are some issues about BMI if you have a lot of weight, but it's all muscle because you happen to be a bodybuilder, then the BMI has to be taken with a grain of salt. But for the 99% of people who aren't bodybuilders, the BMI is a pretty good index of whether your weight is in a good range.
All right. Here's a good question. This one for you, Dr. Loomis, comes to us from Candy at 1217. You're the athlete among us here, Dr. Loomis. Candy wants to know, how many times a week should a woman of 52 years of age, how often should she be resistance training?
So, yeah, that's a great question, Chuck. And resistance training is a very important part of staying healthy. Maintaining muscle mass, muscle tone increases insulin sensitivity. As we age, it improves balance and decreases fall risk and risk for hip fractures and things like that. It's been shown you probably need about 2 to 3 days a week of resistance training. Unlike endurance training, where really you should try to do something most every day. And it doesn't really matter what form that resistance training takes. You can do weights, you can do dumbbells, you can do machines, you can do, I use resistance bands at home now because the gym is still closed where I go. You can do body weight, do planks and push-ups and things like that. You need about, if you're going to lift weights, it needs to be a weight you can comfortably lift between about 10 and 15 times, and then about 2 to 3 sets of each weight. So, and again, 2 to 3 days a week. You do want to let your muscles recover between. You don't want to do it, more than about every other day, just because our muscles need time to rebuild, to recover from the workout, and then rebuild themselves. And that's how we build muscle mass. Again, endurance training, needs to be most days. Just as an aside, I think it's unfortunate. We as human beings evolved to be physically active because we had to be physically active to survive. We had to gather and hunt food or run away from fight leopards. And so, if you look at the anatomy and biomechanics of our feet and ankles and knees and hips and our cardiovascular system and even our stress response, it's all designed to facilitate the performance of physical activity. Unfortunately, I would say that physical activity has devolved in the modern world. And what I mean by that is, we either, we put on special clothes, we go to a special place, we do a special thing, it has a start and a stop. We tend to do that or not do anything, sit on the couch, right? But in fact, there's lots of ways to incorporate physical activity into your day-to-day routine that doesn't involve exercise per se. Taking the stairs instead of the elevator, parking on the farm in the parking lot, working in the garden, going for a bike ride on the C&O Canal or hike in Rock Creek Park if you're in DC. So all of those things count. So it's really about, I'm not discouraging people from going to the gym, but the point is you don't have to do that to be physically active. And so it's physical activity that we're really looking for, which should include a resistance training component.
We have time for a few more questions, so keep on posting those in the comments section now, or send them to us on Twitter using the hashtag #ExamRoomLive. Dr. Barnard, bouncing back over to you. This is a question from Anna at 1215. She wants to know, should somebody take B12 alone, or should that be a B complex?
Oh, great question. B12 alone is perfectly fine. And the reason that I say that is you're very likely are getting all of the other B vitamins from the vegetables and beans that you're eating. So if you take a B complex, you're getting B12 and you're getting the other B vitamins, but B12 is really the only one that you're missing. By the way, you can take it on an empty stomach. You can take it with food. Either way, it's good. It works fine. And even if you have absorption issues, you're not making enough stomach acid, for example, these B12 supplements are pretty highly absorbed, even in the absence of stomach acid.
And somebody had a follow-up to that. How much B12 should we be taking every day?
The amount, the recommended daily allowance is 2.4 micrograms. But which is tiny. It's not a gram, it's not a milligram, it's micrograms, and 2.4 micrograms is the amount that adults need. So you race over to the health food store, look at the B12 aisle and pick up the bottles, and you will discover there is not a single bottle on the shelf with 2.4 micrograms. They've got 100. They've got 200, they got 500, they got 5,000, they got 10,000. And you're going to think, this is enormous. I don't need that much B12. And you know what? You're right. So get the smallest one they sell and take it every day. If it's a real boatload, like 1,000 micrograms, could take it every other day, something like that. And one last little caveat here. We used to say that B12 couldn't ever be toxic in overdose. But we've known for a long time that if you have too little of certain vitamins, it's not good. If you have too much of some vitamins, like vitamin A, that can be toxic. And with B12, we thought, well, no matter how much you overdo it, you're going to be okay. I want to be a little more cautious about it. I don't think we should be doing wildly overdose. We shouldn't be wildly overdosing vitamin B12. The reason I say that is some data have come out looking at people who run chronically really high B12 levels, and they don't seem to do as well as people who have their B12 in the healthy range. So long-winded answer, but the amount you need is 2.4 micrograms. Get the smallest supplement you can, take it every day. If you take a multiple vitamin, it's got B12 in it, take that every day. You're going to be in good shape.
All right, and I want to stick with you one more time. This is a great question from a viewer, Dr. Barnard here. It comes to us at 1211. They write, I eat rice very frequently, at least once a day. Should I be concerned about the arsenic in it?
That's a great question. You know, there are a couple of issues here. One is that there is arsenic in the soil in certain areas. And I think I'm going to throw a little bit of blame at the poultry industry, which has used arsenical compounds as worming agents in chickens. And so some of that has been an environmental contaminant as well. So anything that grows in the soil can pick up traces of it. The traces are quite modest. So most of us haven't been too concerned about it. But if you are, you can look online and you will see different brands that discuss their contaminant levels. Surprisingly enough, when I've looked in this, in some cases, the imported rice is cleaner in certain areas, which I've attributed to the fact that they don't have such big poultry industries there as we do in America.
Dr. Loomis, team this one up for you. It comes to us from Bernadette. She wants to know, can you please comment on the importance of healthy fats and nutrients from whole raw nuts and seeds? I'm worried about overdoing it with them.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you know, we talk, there's different kinds of fat in our diet. There's, you know, saturated trans fats being something you should completely eliminate from your diet. There's really no healthy level of trans fat. Typically comes from fat that's been cooked at a high temperature and it gets transformed, and marked association with heart disease. So we know that very high fat diets, you know, they can lead to weight gain because there's 9 calories in a gram of fat versus only 4 calories in protein and carbohydrates. So, you know, every gram of food you switch from fat to protein or carbohydrate, you cut the calories in half. That being said, our bodies do need fat. We need fat for a healthy brain, for nervous system, you know, our cell walls. So there is a need for fat. However, you know, and so the fats that occur in plants are mainly unsaturated fats or polyunsaturated fats, which are the most healthful fats. There are some foods that have a little bit more saturated fat, particularly avocados, you know, some nuts, coconut in particular is fairly high in saturated fat. And those are okay as part of a healthful diet, but you do need to be careful. The natural macronutrient ratios of a whole food plant-based diet are about 75% unprocessed whole food plants. It's about 15% plant-based per percent fat. And so that's really what you should shoot for, is to try to limit your fat intake to no more than about 10 or 15% of your total calories. That's really hard to do if you're eating a ton of nuts, or, you know, eating a couple avocados every day, or you're cooking with a lot of cooking oil and things like that, or, you know, you're eating chips that have oil added. Oil has become somewhat ubiquitous in a lot of at least the more highly processed foods that we eat. So you need to be careful. So, but there's nothing wrong with, you know, again, with eating avocado and nuts. I recommend my patients use them almost like a condiment. So, you know, if you want to have a few slices of avocado in your black bean bowl or a burrito, or you want to, you know, throw a handful of nuts on your oatmeal in the morning, absolutely nothing wrong with that. But you do need to be careful about the overconsumption of these very high fat, whole food plant-based foods, particularly, again, nuts, seeds, and avocado. They do play a role, but you just have to be careful.
All right, Dr. Barnard, let's wrap things up here with a couple of follow-up questions. This one comes to us from Edith at 1229. She says, if chickens are given arsenic for worms, does the meat then have arsenic in it as well?
Yes. First of all, there are so many reasons to get away from chicken in particular. Even when you take off the skin and throw away the dark meat, just the chicken breast itself is about 23% fat. So it's got a lot of fat. About a third of that fat is saturated fat. That's the one that Dr. Loomis was talking about as being a bad fat. You want to get away from it. Chicken has almost the same cholesterol content as beef. And it's not just the arsenic and things that we're concerned about, but salmonella and other fecal organisms are present in a lot of the chickens when they come to the store. So I'm hoping you'll cross it off your grocery list.
And final question of the day comes to us from Carroll at 1228. Wants to know, is consuming nutritional yeast enough B12 without then taking a supplement?
It would be if you take a lot of it. When you get the nutritional yeast canister at home, look at how much is in one serving. And what you'll discover is it's typically lower than the RDA, the recommended daily allowance. So I would use nutritional yeast. I think it's certainly a tasty thing. It's got no fat, unlike the cheese that it replaces. So it's a good thing, but it may not quite meet your B12 needs. By the way, before we sign off, Dr. Loomis was mentioning all the plant-based athletes out there, and we want to do a salute to Formula One champion Lewis Hamilton, who is racing this weekend. He's been a vegan for a long time, credits it with so many benefits for him. He's not only strong, but his alertness, his quickness is unmatched. He's racing for his record-setting 7th title, and he is just about the winningest driver of all time. So we're going to wish Lewis Hamilton well at the Grand Prix this weekend.
Have you been watching him this season? I tune in. The races typically come on about 9 o'clock our time here in DC. And I mean, he is just lapping the field. It's unbelievable how dominant he has been this year.
He has. And he's been just a wonderful role model in every possible way. A very ethical person, very, very kind, and clearly the best driver in the field. And others are, because he's so outspoken about the value of a completely plant-based diet, other drivers are taking it up. And in that kind of fast culture, for some of them, that's a whole new idea. But he like Novak Djokovic and others, he's really letting other people know that you want an edge, get the animal products off your plate.
All right. Dr. Barnard, appreciate it, my friend.
You too, Chuck.
All right. If we didn't get to your question today, have no fear. As always, we do save them, and we will do our best to get you an answer on an upcoming episode. So go ahead and keep on posting that, or send them to us on social media using the hashtag ExamRoomLive. Now, if you would like to ask a question privately of Dr. Loomis, you can do that as well. Schedule a telemedicine appointment at the Barnard Medical Center. All you need to do to make that appointment is visit barnardmedical.org. You see that web address right there, or pick up the phone, call 202-527-7500. Appointments now available in more than a quarter of the country, and new states coming online all the time. So 202-527-7500 or barnardmedical.org for your healthier future. That's going to wrap up the week for us. Appreciate you being here, my exam roomies. Thank you guys so very much for watching. Bal and the gang, and Nerdtritionist, who has the absolute greatest name I've ever seen in the chat room, Nerdtritionist. That is fantastic. Thank you so very much for joining us. And again, thank you so much to the crew behind the scenes that makes the magic happen, makes the Exam Room Live possible. Appreciate you. On behalf of everyone here at the Physicians Committee, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. Thanks again so very much for watching. We'll talk to you again on Monday. But until then, stay safe, take a stand, and keep it plant-based.